At my husband's funeral, my sister Delphine approached me with a forged letter claiming my husband was the father of her daughter. She demanded half of my $950,000 Victorian mansion as inheritance. She even brought witnesses to make it official. I said, "How interesting," and tried to hold back my laughter because what she didn't know would destroy her entire scheme. My name is Genevieve Briggs, and at 36 years old, I never expected to be planning a funeral instead of growing old with the love of my life. 3 weeks ago, I lost Sebastian, my husband of 11 years, to a sudden heart attack while he was reviewing blueprints for our latest restoration project. Just hours after we laid him to rest, my younger sister Delphine cornered me at the cemetery with the most audacious lie I had ever heard. If you are watching this because family betrayal hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled what came next. Sebastian and I met 13 years ago at an architectural preservation gala in Charleston. I was presenting my research on Victorian mansion restoration techniques when this tall, dark-haired man approached me after my presentation. His eyes lit up as he discussed the engineering challenges of preserving century-old structures without compromising their integrity. "I have never met someone who understands that old buildings have souls," he said, his smile making his green eyes crinkle at the corners. "Would you like to explore some abandoned estates with me this weekend? I know where to find the most beautiful ruins." That was Sebastian. Brilliant, passionate about craftsmanship, and completely devoted to preserving history. I fell hard and fast. Our first date involved sketching restoration plans for a crumbling 1880s conservatory, dreaming about bringing it back to life. He was a structural engineer specializing in historic preservation, the kind of man who could calculate load-bearing requirements while appreciating hand-carved moldings. 10 months after we met, he proposed in the ruins of that same conservatory, promising to build me a greenhouse studio in our future home where I could design and dream. We bought our Queen and Victorian mansion in the historic district shortly after our first anniversary. At $950,000, it was a stretch financially, but Sebastian had just made partner at his engineering firm, and I was building a reputation as a boutique architectural restoration consultant. The house needed extensive work, but it had incredible bones, soaring ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a large backyard where Sebastian immediately began planning my promised greenhouse studio. Those plans sustained us through the hardest years of our marriage. For 5 years, we tried for children, charting cycles and hoping each month would bring the news we desperately wanted. Then came the specialists, the procedures, the heartbreak of multiple miscarriages. 3 rounds of IVF drained our savings and our spirits. The final blow came when doctors discovered I had developed severe endometriosis requiring a complete hysterectomy. I was 32 years old, and my dreams of motherhood were over. I still remember the night I came home from that appointment, finding Sebastian in the backyard staring at the foundation he had poured for my studio. "I started building this thinking our children would play here while you worked," he said quietly. "But maybe it can be something different. Maybe it can be where you create beauty that lasts longer than any of us." He was right. We slowly rebuilt our dreams around different hopes. The greenhouse studio became my sanctuary, where I designed restoration projects that brought forgotten beauty back to life. We traveled, exploring architectural wonders across Europe. We poured our hearts into restoring our own home, room by room, until it was featured in Architectural Digest. Sebastian supported my decision to launch my own firm, and our life was full, if different than what we had first planned. My younger sister Delphine had always existed on the periphery of our happiness. For years younger than me at 32, she had been the family wild child from adolescence. While I was studying architecture and building a career, she was bouncing between modeling gigs, bartending jobs, and dramatic relationships. Our parents constantly worried about her, which translated into them making excuses for her behavior and bailing her out of financial troubles repeatedly. Delphine and I had a complicated relationship that stretched back to childhood. She was undeniably stunning with platinum blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and the kind of effortless charm that drew people to her like moths to flame. But there was always an undercurrent of competition from her side, a need to outshine me at every turn. If I achieved something, she needed to one-up me. When I started dating Sebastian, she suddenly became fascinated with engineers and architects. When we bought our Victorian mansion, she complained for months about her cramped apartment, fishing for our parents to help her upgrade to something more glamorous. It was exhausting, but Sebastian encouraged me to maintain the relationship. "She is your only sister," he would remind me. "Family is complicated, but it is still family. Maybe she will grow out of this phase." 3 years ago, Delphine's behavior toward Sebastian took a disturbing turn. It started innocently enough during a family barbecue at our house. I had stepped inside to answer an important client call, leaving Sebastian grilling burgers while Delphine lounged in a bikini by our pool. When I returned 20 minutes later, I found her sitting inappropriately close to him, her hand on his arm as she laughed at something I had not heard. Sebastian looked uncomfortable, stepping away when he saw me, but I brushed it off as Delphine being her usual attention-seeking self. But the incidents escalated. She began showing up at Sebastian's office uninvited, claiming she was in the neighborhood and wanted to take her brother-in-law to lunch. She sent flirtatious text messages after family gatherings, always with plausible deniability if confronted. During my birthday party that year, I caught her attempting to kiss Sebastian in our kitchen while I was greeting guests in the foyer. When confronted, she laughed it off as being affectionate with family, claiming I was being oversensitive. That night, Sebastian and I had a serious conversation. "This cannot continue," he said as we prepared for bed. "Her behavior is escalating, and I am concerned about what she might try next. I want to start documenting everything, just in case." Sebastian was nothing if not methodical. He began keeping detailed records of every inappropriate interaction with Delphine, including dates, times, and exact quotes. He saved every text message she sent, screenshot every social media comment that crossed boundaries. When she showed up at his office, he had his assistant document the visits. After the kitchen incident, he even installed discreet security cameras around our property, not paranoid, but prepared. "I have seen what family drama can do to people," he explained when I questioned the extent of his documentation. "My mentor went through a nasty situation with his brother-in-law trying to claim part of his practice. The only thing that saved him was having everything in writing." Then came the medical issue that changed everything. Sebastian had been experiencing discomfort for months before finally seeing a specialist. The diagnosis was a varicose cell requiring surgical intervention. The procedure was successful, but during recovery, the surgeon discovered an underlying condition that necessitated additional surgery. The second procedure had an unexpected consequence. It left Sebastian sterile. The irony was devastating. After years of struggling with my fertility issues, now Sebastian faced his own reproductive challenges. The surgery occurred 18 months before Delphine's daughter Rosalie was conceived, making it medically impossible for Sebastian to father any children afterward. We kept this information completely private. After years of invasive questions about our childless status from well-meaning relatives, we had learned to guard our medical privacy carefully. Only Sebastian, myself, and his doctors knew about the procedure and its consequences. But Sebastian, ever the engineer, saw potential problems on the horizon. 2 weeks after his surgery, he made an appointment with our family attorney, Jasper Rothwell. I accompanied him to the meeting, listening as Sebastian detailed Delphine's inappropriate behavior and his recent medical procedure. "I want everything documented properly," Sebastian told Jasper. "My wife's sister has been making advances for months, and I have a feeling this situation might escalate, especially if she ever becomes desperate enough to try something truly destructive." Jasper recommended creating a comprehensive file documenting everything: the inappropriate behavior, the medical records confirming Sebastian's sterility, copies of text messages and emails. Sebastian also updated his will through official legal channels, ensuring everything would come to me in the event of his death, with specific language protecting against fraudulent claims. "Better to have documentation and never need it," Jasper advised, "than to wish you had it when someone tries to take advantage of a vulnerable situation." We followed his advice meticulously, creating what Sebastian jokingly called our family disaster preparedness kit. All documents were stored in our safety deposit box at the bank, with copies kept in Jasper's office files. "I plan to be around to deal with any of Delphine's drama personally for at least another 50 years, Sebastian said when we locked the box. But if something happens to me, I want you protected from whatever scheme she might concoct." 2 years later, Delphine announced she was pregnant. The father, she claimed, was Dorian Cross, a bartender and aspiring musician she had been dating on and off for several months. Their relationship seemed volatile from the outside, with dramatic breakups and passionate reconciliations that provided endless fodder for family gossip. Dorian was handsome in a dangerous way, with tattoos covering his arms and a motorcycle that our parents disapproved of intensely. The pregnancy announcement came at Thanksgiving dinner, delivered with theatrical tears and declarations about the miracle of life. I felt the familiar sting of jealousy watching my parents fuss over Delphine's news. After all our struggles, all our heartbreak, she had accidentally achieved what we had desperately wanted. But I pushed those feelings down, determined to be the best aunt possible to her child. When Rosalie was born a healthy 7 pounds, I was at the hospital with flowers and a handmade blanket I had spent months crocheting. Delphine seemed overwhelmed by motherhood from the start, frequently calling me in tears about Rosalie's colic, her exhaustion, her struggles with breastfeeding. I stepped in as much as I could, sometimes watching Rosalie overnight so Delphine could sleep. Sebastian was notably less involved with Rosalie than I was. At the time, I assumed it was because of our own fertility struggles, that it might be emotionally difficult for him to bond with a baby that was not ours. He was always kind when Delphine brought Rosalie over, but he maintained a certain distance that I never questioned. In retrospect, I wonder if he sensed something about the situation that I missed. 6 months after Rosalie's birth, Dorian Cross disappeared. One morning, Delphine woke up to find him gone, along with her jewelry, electronics, and what little money she had saved. He left no forwarding address, no explanation, and no child support. Delphine was devastated, calling me sobbing about being abandoned with a baby and no resources. I helped her apply for assistance programs and even loaned her money for rent when she fell behind. Our parents stepped in as well, providing financial support and free babysitting. It seemed like Delphine was finally growing up, facing the consequences of her choices and working to build a stable life for her daughter. Then came that terrible Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. Sebastian complained of chest tightness before leaving for work, but insisted it was just stress from a difficult project deadline. "I have that presentation to the Historic Preservation Board today," he said, kissing me goodbye. "I will call you after the meeting to celebrate." That call never came. Instead, I received one from the emergency room. By the time I arrived, Sebastian was already gone. Massive heart attack at age 38. The doctors said nothing could have been done, that it was a genetic condition no one had detected. He died reviewing blueprints for a Victorian mansion restoration, doing what he loved most. The next days passed in a blur of arrangements and overwhelming grief. Delphine was strangely absent during most of the funeral preparations, sending text messages claiming Rosalie was sick or that she could not find reliable childcare. When she did appear at the service, she stayed briefly in the back, leaving before the reception at our home. I was too numb with grief to think much of her absence at the time. I assumed she was being considerate, giving me space to mourn without having to worry about entertaining a fussy toddler. 1 week after we laid Sebastian to rest, I was standing at his graveside arranging fresh flowers when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Delphine approaching, but she was not alone. Her friend Beatrice walked beside her, along with 2 people I did not recognize. "Genevieve," Delphine called out, her voice carrying an unusual confidence. "We need to talk. There is something about Sebastian that you need to know." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. "What could you possibly need to discuss here, Delphine?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "Sebastian left us a letter before he died. It explains everything about his relationship with me and his responsibilities to Rosalie." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What are you talking about?" Delphine's voice grew stronger, more theatrical. "Sebastian and I had an affair 2 years ago. Rosalie is his daughter, not Dorian's. This letter proves he acknowledged paternity and wanted to provide for his child." She gestured to her companions. "These are my witnesses." Beatrice helped me find the letter in Sebastian's office files, and these are friends who can verify that Sebastian told them about Rosalie being his daughter. I stared at her in disbelief, but she was not finished. According to this inheritance document he left, half of your house should go to Rosalie as his biological child. That is $475,000 that rightfully belongs to my daughter. Every eye in the small group turned to me, watching for my reaction. I could see the calculation in Delphine's face, the way she had choreographed this moment for maximum emotional impact, trapping me in grief and shock to avoid resistance to her claims. And then, to everyone's surprise including my own, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Not a happy smile, but the kind that comes when something is so outrageously impossible that it becomes almost comical. I pressed my lips together, trying to contain the inappropriate laughter bubbling up inside me. "How interesting," I said finally, my voice calm and controlled. I took a deep breath, buying time to process the audacity of what I was hearing. "May I see this letter, Delphine?" Her confident expression faltered slightly. She had clearly expected tears, protestations, or immediate capitulation. Slowly, she walked over and handed me the document, several typed pages with what appeared to be Sebastian's signature at the bottom. I scanned it quickly, noting inconsistencies immediately. The language was nothing like Sebastian's precise, technical writing style. The emotional content was completely contrary to his character, full of flowery apologies and dramatic declarations. Most tellingly, the signature was clearly forged. Sebastian always signed legal documents with his professional engineer's stamp, and the handwriting, while similar, lacked the distinctive architectural precision of his actual signature. I carefully folded the papers and handed them back to her. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I think we should discuss this privately, not at Sebastian's grave." "That is it?" Delphine asked, confusion evident in her voice. "You are not going to say anything else?" "Not here," I replied calmly, gathering my purse. "This is not the place for family drama. We can meet at the house tomorrow afternoon to discuss this properly." As I walked to my car, I could hear murmurs behind me, the witnesses clearly confused by my calm reaction. Once inside my vehicle, safely out of view, I finally let out the laugh that had been threatening to escape. It started small, then grew until tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of joy, but a strange mix of grief, anger, and incredulous disbelief at my sister's calculated cruelty. Because there was something Delphine did not know, something that made her elaborate lie not just hurtful, but medically impossible. That afternoon, I drove straight to the bank where Sebastian and I had maintained our safety deposit box. The manager, who had known us for years, expressed sincere condolences as he led me to the vault. I sat alone in the small viewing room and opened the box Sebastian had insisted we prepare for exactly this type of situation. Inside was our disaster preparedness kit, Sebastian's legitimate will, properly notarized and legally executed, leaving everything to me. Medical records detailing his surgery and resulting sterility, making it impossible for him to father any children in the 2 years before Rosalie's conception. A detailed journal Sebastian had kept documenting every inappropriate interaction with Delphine, including dates, times, and exact quotes. Printed copies of every text message she had sent him, every email, every documented visit to his office. A letter from Jasper Rothwell confirming he had witnessed Sebastian's legitimate will and was available to verify its authenticity. And at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope with my name written in Sebastian's familiar architectural lettering. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. "My dearest Genevieve, if you are reading this, something has happened to me, and our family disaster preparedness kit has become necessary. I pray it is many years from now when we are old and grey, and Delphine's manipulations are nothing but distant memories we can laugh about together. But if not, if the worst has happened and she has tried to hurt you in my absence, please know that I anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. Use these documents to protect yourself and my memory. I know how much you value family loyalty, how generous your heart is even toward those who do not deserve it. But you deserve to be protected from people who would exploit that beautiful compassion. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond death itself. Whatever happens, carry that love forward. Your devoted husband, Sebastian." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, feeling his love and protection reaching across the divide of death. My methodical, thoughtful husband had seen this coming and prepared me to face it. I carefully returned most documents to the box, taking only what I needed: copies of the medical records, the legitimate will, and selected pages from Sebastian's journal. Then I called Jasper Rothwell and scheduled an emergency meeting. Jasper Rothwell's law office occupied the entire third floor of a restored 1920s building downtown, the kind of space that reflected both tradition and success. I had only been there a few times with Sebastian, but the receptionist recognized me immediately, her expression softening with sympathy. "Mrs. Briggs," she said, standing to greet me. "Mr. Rothwell is expecting you. Please accept our firm's condolences for your loss. Sebastian was truly one of the finest men we have ever worked with." Jasper was in his early 60s, with distinguished silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an professorial air. He had been Sebastian's mentor when Sebastian first joined the engineering firm, and they had maintained a close professional relationship even after Sebastian started his own practice. He stood when I entered, coming around his desk to embrace me briefly. "Genevieve," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I was heartbroken to hear about Sebastian. He was not just a client, but a dear friend. "How are you holding up?" I explained what had happened at the cemetery, showing him the forged letter Delphine had presented. Jasper examined it carefully, his expression growing increasingly serious as he read. "This is amateur forgery," he said finally, setting the document aside. "The legal language is completely inappropriate for this type of document, and the signature would never withstand professional scrutiny. But the fact that your sister created this at all is deeply concerning. This constitutes several felonies: forgery, fraud, attempted theft." I showed him the documents from our safety deposit box, watching as he reviewed Sebastian's meticulous documentation. "Sebastian was incredibly thorough," Jasper observed, examining the medical records. "These clearly establish that he could not have fathered any children after his surgery, which occurred well before this child was conceived." "What should I do?" I asked. "I do not want to humiliate Delphine publicly, but I cannot allow her to destroy Sebastian's reputation or steal our home based on lies." Jasper leaned back in his chair, considering the situation. "First, we need more information about her current circumstances. People rarely attempt fraud of this magnitude without significant financial pressure motivating them. I recommend hiring a private investigator to understand what is driving this desperation." He called Octavia Sterling, a former police detective who now worked exclusively for the firm on sensitive cases. She arrived within an hour, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Briggs," she said after Jasper explained the situation, "I specialize in family fraud cases, and unfortunately, they are more common than people realize. May I ask a few questions about your sister's recent behavior and circumstances?" I realized how little I actually knew about Delphine's current situation. We had grown more distant since Rosalie's birth, with my attempts to help often being rebuffed or taken for granted without gratitude. "I will need several days to investigate thoroughly," Octavia said when I had shared everything I knew. "I will focus primarily on her financial situation, employment history, and relationship with the child's actual father. Is there anything else you can tell me about this Dorian Cross?" I shared what little I knew about Dorian, the bartender who had disappeared after Rosalie's birth. "Last I heard from family gossip, he moved somewhere out west, but Delphine rarely mentions him anymore." Octavia nodded, making detailed notes. "That gives me a good starting point. I should have preliminary findings within 72 hours. 3 days later, Octavia called requesting an urgent meeting at Jasper's office. When I arrived, both were reviewing documents spread across the conference table, their expressions grim. "Mrs. Briggs," Octavia began once we were seated, "I have uncovered some very troubling information about your sister's current circumstances." According to her investigation, Delphine was facing financial catastrophe. She had accumulated over $125,000 in debt across multiple credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills related to Rosalie's care. Her credit score had plummeted, and she had been rejected for consolidation loans from every major bank. More seriously, she was facing eviction from her luxury apartment, having missed 4 months of rent payments. She has been living far beyond her means for years, Octavia continued, sliding documents across the table. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury vacations she posted on social media while claiming to be struggling financially to your parents. The investigation had also revealed the truth about Dorian Cross. He had not simply abandoned Delphine and Rosalie. He had fled the state to escape both child support obligations and significant gambling debts to dangerous creditors. He was currently wanted on several warrants and had a documented history of domestic violence. I also discovered these, Octavia said, producing printouts of text messages between Delphine and her friend Beatrice. They have been planning this scheme for weeks, since immediately after your husband's funeral. The messages were devastating to read. Sebastian's death might actually be my salvation. If I play this right, I can get at least half of that house. It is worth almost $1 million now. Beatrice knows someone who can forge documents. We just need Sebastian's signature from somewhere. Maybe that charity auction photo from their anniversary party. Genevieve has always been the golden child, the perfect sister with the perfect marriage. Time for me to get what I deserve. She had 11 years with a great man. The least she can do is share the wealth now that he is gone. I felt physically ill reading my sister's calculated cruelty, her willingness to capitalize on my grief and destroy Sebastian's memory for financial gain. There is more, Octavia said gently. I ran a comprehensive background check on Beatrice Wakefield, your sister's co-conspirator. She has a criminal history involving art forgery and has connections to a larger fraud ring operating in the region. This may not be their first attempt at inheritance fraud. The full scope of the betrayal was staggering. This was not just a desperate sister making poor choices, but a premeditated criminal conspiracy designed to exploit my vulnerability while mourning my husband. What are my options? I asked, looking between Jasper and Octavia. Jasper removed his glasses, cleaning them methodically as he spoke. You have several paths forward, Genevieve. We could file criminal charges against both your sister and her accomplice. Given the amount of money involved and the sophisticated nature of the fraud, they would likely face significant prison time. He paused, seeing my distress. Or we could handle this privately. Confront her with the evidence, require her to retract her claims publicly, and potentially work out an arrangement that protects both you and the child, who is innocent in all of this. I left that meeting with a heavy heart and overwhelming anger. That evening, I called Dr. Helena Ashworth, the grief counselor I had been seeing since Sebastian's death, and scheduled an emergency session. In her warm, book-lined office, I unloaded the entire situation. I am so furious I can barely think straight, I admitted. But Rosalie is just a baby. None of this is her fault. And despite everything, Delphine is still my sister. Dr. Ashworth listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about my relationship with Delphine throughout our lives and my parents' typical responses to her behavior. It sounds like this pattern of manipulation and competition has existed since childhood, she observed. The current situation is an escalation, not an anomaly. Your sister has learned that dramatic crises often result in other people solving her problems. What would you do? I asked desperately. I cannot make that decision for you, she replied gently. But I will say that compassion does not require allowing yourself to be victimized. You can respond with kindness while still establishing firm boundaries and appropriate consequences. After much reflection, I decided on a course of action. I would confront Delphine privately with all the evidence, offering her a choice: face criminal prosecution for her fraud, or accept a rehabilitation-focused agreement that would provide for Rosalie while requiring real accountability from her. I called Delphine the next morning, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We need to talk about Sebastian's letter and your claims about Rosalie. Can you come to the house this afternoon at 2 o'clock? Come alone. I knew you would see reason eventually, she replied, sounding smugly satisfied. This is the right thing to do, Genevieve. Sebastian would want his daughter provided for. I spent the morning preparing for our meeting, arranging documents in logical order and setting up recording equipment on Jasper's advice. South Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording, he had explained. But it is still better practice to inform her that the conversation is being recorded to ensure legal admissibility. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took several deep breaths before opening the door to find Delphine standing on my front porch, dressed in an expensive outfit I had never seen before, her confidence evident in her posture. "Come in," I said, leading her to Sebastian's study, where I had arranged 2 chairs facing each other across his desk. The room felt appropriate for this conversation, surrounded by his architectural books and engineering awards, his presence still tangible in every detail. "I hope you do not mind if we record our conversation," I said, gesturing to the device on the desk. "Given the legal nature of what we are discussing, it seems prudent to have an accurate record." Delphine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Whatever makes you comfortable, though I think this should be fairly straightforward. The letter is clear about Sebastian's intentions." I turned on the recorder, stating the date and time and confirming Delphine's consent to being recorded. Then I sat back, studying my sister's face carefully. "Before we discuss any letters or legal documents," I said, "I would like you to tell me exactly what you are claiming happened between you and Sebastian." Delphine launched into a well-rehearsed story about a supposed affair that began 2 years ago. According to her version, she and Sebastian had connected during a period when he and I were supposedly having marital problems. She claimed they had met regularly at a downtown hotel, that Sebastian had confessed his unhappiness in our marriage, and that Rosalie had been conceived during these encounters. "He felt terrible about the deception," she said, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. "But once Rosalie was born, especially with her early health issues, he could not bear to hurt you further. He promised he would take care of his responsibilities to his daughter, though." I listened without interrupting, noting the numerous inconsistencies in her timeline and details that contradicted what I knew about Sebastian's actual schedule during that period. When she finished, I began asking specific questions. "Which hotel did you meet at?" I asked calmly. "The historic Charleston Inn," she replied without hesitation. "And what room did you typically use?" She faltered slightly. "It varied. Usually something on the 3rd floor with a harbor view." I continued with increasingly detailed questions about their supposed meetings. What time of day did they meet? What did Sebastian typically wear to these encounters? How did he act differently around me afterward? What did he say about our marriage during these intimate moments? With each question, Delphine's answers became more vague and contradictory. She claimed Sebastian was unhappy with our childless marriage, but could not explain why he had seemed more affectionate and attentive than ever during that period. She insisted they had met regularly for months, but could not provide consistent details about when or where. "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped, her composure cracking. "The important thing is that Rosalie is Sebastian's daughter, and his letter proves he wanted to provide for her." "Actually," I said calmly, opening the folder I had prepared, "both of those claims are demonstrably false." I placed the medical records on the desk between us. 18 months before Rosalie was conceived, Sebastian underwent surgery that left him completely sterile. This was confirmed by multiple follow-up tests. It was medically impossible for him to father any children after that procedure. Delphine's face drained of color. She picked up the medical records with trembling hands, scanning the clinical language and dates. "These could be forged," she said weakly. "They are not," I replied, "and Sebastian's urologist is prepared to testify to their authenticity if necessary. But that is just the beginning." I produced Sebastian's legitimate will, properly notarized and filed with the court. This is Sebastian's actual will, prepared by Jasper Rothwell and witnessed by 2 partners at his firm. As you can see, it leaves everything to me, with no mention of any children because Sebastian knew he could not have any. Delphine stared at the document, her confidence visibly crumbling. "He must have prepared another will after this one," she said desperately. "The letter I showed you proves he changed his mind." "The letter you showed me," I said evenly, "is a poorly executed forgery. Jasper has already identified multiple legal inconsistencies in the language, and the signature is clearly fake. Creating fraudulent legal documents is a felony in South Carolina, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. I continued methodically presenting evidence. Sebastian's detailed journal documenting every inappropriate advance she had made, the text messages between her and Beatrice discussing their plan, and finally, Octavia's report detailing her financial troubles and criminal associations. "We know everything, Delphine," I said as she sat in stunned silence. "The question now is what happens next." For a long moment, she did not speak. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. Not the theatrical tears I had seen her use to manipulate our parents, but deep, body-racking sobs that seemed to come from genuine despair. "I did not know what else to do," she finally said between gasps. "I'm going to lose everything. The apartment, my car, maybe even Rosalie if social services finds out how bad things have gotten. I thought if I could just get some money from the house sale, I could start over." "So you decided to destroy Sebastian's reputation," I said, my voice hardening despite her tears. "To tell everyone he cheated on me, to forge legal documents, to exploit my grief." "I was desperate," she shouted, her sadness turning to anger. "You have always had everything perfect: house, successful business, everyone's respect. What do I have? A baby I can barely afford to feed, more debt than I can ever repay, and no one who gives a damn whether I succeed or fail." Her outburst hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way Delphine rarely allowed herself to be. Despite my anger, I could hear the genuine pain beneath her words. "Rosalie is Dorian's daughter, is not she?" I asked more gently. She nodded, wiping her eyes with tissues I offered. "Yes. Sebastian never touched me, despite my attempts years ago. He was annoyingly loyal to you, always shutting down any flirtation immediately." "And the letter?" "Beatrice helped me create it. She does graphic design and has some experience with document alteration. I was going to use it to pressure you into giving me money, claiming it was what Sebastian would have wanted. I never expected you to investigate so thoroughly." I turned off the recorder and sat back, considering my response. Delphine watched me nervously, clearly expecting the worst. "I could press charges," I said finally. "What you did was illegal, not to mention cruel and calculated during the worst period of my life." She nodded miserably. "I know. And I deserve whatever happens to me." "But that would hurt Rosalie," I continued. "And despite everything, she is my niece. I love her, and I want her to have a stable, healthy life." I leaned forward, ensuring Delphine was looking directly at me. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to publicly retract all your claims about Sebastian. You will admit that you lied about the affair, that Rosalie is not his daughter, and that you forged that document. You will do this in front of our family and anyone else you involved in this scheme." "And then what?" she asked, her voice small. "I will still be evicted, still drowning in debt." "I'm not finished," I said. "In exchange for your complete honesty and a legal agreement never to attempt anything like this again, I will help you and Rosalie. Not by giving you half my house, but by establishing a trust fund for Rosalie's education and medical needs, and helping you find stable housing and employment." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Why would you do that after what I tried to do to you?" "Not for you," I said honestly. "For Rosalie, and because Sebastian would want me to help his niece, even if her mother tried to destroy his reputation. But there will be strict conditions." I outlined the requirements: mandatory therapy to address her manipulative behaviors, financial counseling to learn responsible money management, maintaining steady employment, and allowing me to be involved in Rosalie's life to ensure her well-being. If you violate any of these conditions, the support stops immediately, and I will pursue criminal charges for what you have already done. Delphine was quiet for several minutes, processing everything. "I do not deserve your help," she finally said. "No, you do not," I agreed. "But Rosalie deserves a stable home and proper care, and I deserve to have my husband's memory remain untarnished. This solution gives us both what we need." After working out additional details with Jasper's guidance, Delphine agreed to my terms. We would formalize everything legally within the week, and she would make her public confession at a family dinner I was arranging for the following Sunday. As I walked her to the door, she paused. "I have been jealous of you my entire life, Genevieve. Everything always seemed so easy for you, so perfect." "Nothing about my life has been easy," I replied firmly. "You just never bothered to look beyond the surface. Maybe it is time you started seeing people as they actually are, not as props in your personal drama." The family dinner I arranged for Sunday evening was tense from the moment our parents arrived. My mother brought her famous peach cobbler, clearly attempting to smooth over whatever conflict she sensed brewing. "I do not understand why this could not wait," she said as she set the dessert on my dining room counter. "Delphine has been calling us in tears all week, saying you are forcing her to attend some kind of family meeting." "Everything will be explained once we are all together," I replied, pouring wine for everyone. "This situation needs to be addressed properly, with everyone present." By 7 o'clock, we were seated around my dining room table, the same room where Sebastian and I had hosted countless family celebrations over the years. My parents looked uncomfortable, Delphine appeared pale and nervous, and I felt the weight of what was about to unfold. "Thank you for coming," I began, gesturing to the small recording device I had placed in the center of the table. "I am recording this conversation for legal purposes. Delphine has something important to share with you about claims she made regarding Sebastian." My sister looked down at her plate, her usual confidence completely absent. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I lied about Sebastian being Rosalie's father. We never had an affair. The document I showed at the cemetery was forged." My parents stared at her in stunned silence. My father was the first to speak, his voice tight with anger. "Do you have any idea what that accusation did to your sister? To Sebastian's memory?" Delphine explained her desperate financial situation, detailing the mounting debts, the eviction notice, and her criminal association with Beatrice. As she spoke, I watched my mother's expression shift from shock to her typical protective sympathy. "Oh, honey," my mother said when Delphine finished. "Why did not you come to us for help instead of concocting such a terrible lie? Would you have given me $475,000? Delphine asked bluntly. "Because that is what I would have gotten if my plan had worked." "Of course we could not provide that kind of money," my father replied, his voice rising. "But we could have helped with rent, found you resources, supported you properly. Instead, you chose to try to defraud your grieving sister." "I know it was wrong," Delphine admitted. "Genevieve has every right to press criminal charges against me." My mother turned to me in alarm. "You would not actually prosecute your own sister, would you?" I felt a familiar flash of frustration at her immediate rush to protect Delphine. "Your other daughter just lost her husband and then had to defend his memory against false accusations of infidelity. Where was your concern for me in all this?" "Of course we care about you," my father said uncomfortably. "But Delphine has always needed more guidance, more help." "And whose fault is that?" I asked. "You have been enabling her poor decisions her entire adult life. Maybe if she had faced real consequences occasionally, she would not have escalated to criminal fraud." To my surprise, Delphine shook her head. "No, Mom, Genevieve is right. You always made excuses for me, always found ways to fix my mistakes. It never helped me learn to take responsibility for my choices." My parents looked genuinely stunned by this admission. "So what happens now?" my father asked. "Is Delphine going to jail?" I explained the agreement we had reached, the trust fund for Rosalie, the requirements for therapy and stable employment, and the boundaries I was establishing going forward. "That is very generous," my father said, looking relieved. "More generous than she deserves after what she attempted." "Well," my mother said, brightening slightly, "at least this is all working out. Delphine has learned her lesson, Genevieve is helping with Rosalie, and we can put this unpleasantness behind us." "It is not that simple, Mom," I said firmly. "Trust has been broken here, possibly permanently. The family dynamic cannot just return to normal because everyone apologizes." "What do you mean?" she asked, looking worried. I mean that I need you both to stop enabling Delphine's destructive behavior. No more financial bailouts, no more making excuses for her choices. She needs to stand on her own feet with appropriate support that encourages growth, not dependency. I also established clear boundaries for my own relationship with Delphine. I will be involved in Rosalie's life because I love her and want what is best for her. But Delphine and I will not be close sisters again, at least not for a very long time. What she did was a fundamental betrayal that will take years to heal, if it ever does. My mother looked distressed. But we are family. Families forgive each other. Being family does not mean accepting abuse, I replied gently. What Delphine did was abusive. She tried to exploit my grief, destroy my husband's reputation, and steal my home. That has consequences, even within a family. The remainder of dinner was subdued, with everyone processing this new reality. When my parents prepared to leave, my father hugged me tightly. I am proud of how you handled this situation, he whispered. Sebastian would be proud too. My mother's hug was more hesitant, her eyes already mourning the fantasy of a close-knit family she had always insisted we were. Delphine was the last to leave. At the door, she hesitated again. I really am sorry, Genevieve. Not just for the fraud, but for all of it. For years of competition and jealousy, for not being the sister you deserved. I hope the therapy helps you understand why you made these choices, I replied. Rosalie deserves a mother who is emotionally healthy and honest. Do you think you will ever be able to forgive me? I considered her question carefully. I do not know, I answered truthfully. But I am willing to see where this path takes us, for Rosalie's sake and maybe eventually for ours. 2 years have passed since that confrontation, and the changes in our family have been profound. The trust fund for Rosalie has already proven invaluable, covering her ongoing medical needs and early childhood education. Her heart condition, while requiring regular monitoring, has responded well to treatment, and she is growing into a bright, curious toddler who brings joy to everyone around her. Delphine has surprised everyone, myself included, by genuinely embracing the conditions of our agreement. 18 months of intensive therapy helped her recognize destructive patterns that had governed her behavior since adolescence. She identified the roots of her constant need to compete with me, the self-sabotage that had characterized most of her adult relationships, and the entitled thinking that had led her to believe others owed her financial support. She found steady employment as an office manager at a pediatric dental practice, a job that provides both stability and benefits. More importantly, she has maintained that employment consistently, something she had never managed before. Her financial counseling sessions taught her budgeting skills and debt management strategies that have allowed her to slowly pay down her obligations while building emergency savings for the first time in her adult life. Our relationship remains formal and cautious, but it has evolved from hostile to cordial. I see Rosalie regularly, taking her to museums, parks, and children's activities. These visits also allow me to monitor the home environment and ensure Rosalie is receiving proper care. Delphine has been respectful of boundaries, never pushing for more intimacy than I am comfortable providing. My parents struggled initially with the new family dynamics. My mother especially found it difficult to accept that her daughters might never have the close relationship she had always envisioned. But over time, they have learned to support Delphine without enabling her dependency, offering encouragement and practical help rather than financial bailouts and excuse-making. As for me, the grief support group I joined shortly after Sebastian's death became a lifeline through the darkest period of my life. 12 strangers bound together by loss gradually became close friends who understood each other in ways that even well-meaning family could not. We continue to meet monthly, celebrating milestones and supporting each other through setbacks. 6 months after the confrontation with Delphine, I established the Sebastian Briggs Foundation for Architectural Preservation, providing grants to restore historic buildings in underserved communities. Working on these projects gives me purpose and keeps Sebastian's passion for preservation alive. Seeing century-old structures return to their former glory feels like continuing our shared work together. The Foundation's first major project was restoring that same conservatory where Sebastian had proposed, transforming it into a community art center. Standing in the completed space, surrounded by the soaring glass and intricate ironwork we had once sketched together, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since his death. 18 months after Sebastian died, I met someone unexpected. Dr. Marcus Whitfield is a professor of architectural history at the local university, thoughtful and kind with a quiet sense of humor that reminds me of Sebastian in some ways, though he is very much his own person. We met at a foundation fundraiser, bonding over our shared passion for historic preservation and the challenges of maintaining old buildings in modern contexts. Our relationship developed slowly, both of us cautious but hopeful. Marcus understands that Sebastian will always be part of my life, that loving again does not mean replacing what came before. He has never asked me to remove Sebastian's photos from my home or change anything about how I honor his memory. Instead, he has added his own warmth to spaces that had grown cold with grief. Standing in my greenhouse studio this morning, tending the orchid Sebastian had dreamed of me growing here, I reflected on everything I have learned through this ordeal. I discovered that family relationships require clear boundaries to remain healthy, that documentation is not just legal protection but emotional validation when others try to rewrite history, and that forgiveness does not require forgetting or enabling harmful behavior to continue. I learned that sometimes the people we expect to protect us are the ones we most need protection from, and that strength often emerges from the most painful betrayals. I found reserves of resilience I never knew I possessed, navigating legal complexities and family drama while processing devastating grief. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that Sebastian's love continues to protect me even in his absence. His foresight in documenting Delphine's behavior, his careful legal preparations, and his understanding of her capacity for manipulation saved me when I was most vulnerable. The foundation we built together, both literally in our restored home and figuratively in our marriage, proved strong enough to withstand attacks from those who would exploit tragedy for personal gain. The orchids swayed gently in the morning breeze filtering through the greenhouse windows. Like grief itself, they require patience, careful tending, and faith that beauty will eventually bloom from what appears dormant. I am not the same person I was before Sebastian died, before Delphine's betrayal forced me to confront ugly family dynamics I had long ignored. I am stronger in some ways, more cautious in others, but ultimately more authentic in how I approach relationships and boundaries. Sometimes the most painful betrayals teach us to find strength we never knew we had. Sebastian could not have predicted the specific shape of Delphine's deception, but somehow he prepared me to face whatever came after he was gone. And in that way, his love protects me still. If there is one thing I would share with anyone facing betrayal within their family, it is this: protect yourself with both documentation and clear boundaries. The people who truly love you will respect those boundaries, and those who cannot were never safe for you to begin with. Trust your instincts, even when others tell you that you are overreacting or being unforgiving. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is family. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members who exploited your generosity or grief? Thanks for watching, and remember that sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved.